Hi everyone, I'm back to working on this flock of sheep painting. So if you remember, I began with a watercolour marker sketch, put in some very loose washes of watercolour for the background, started to add a little bit of interactive acrylic, and my plan now is to work on this main sheep here. I've got my interactive acrylics, so I've got tinting white, burnt umber, cad red, ultramarine blue and cad yellow. So let's begin by mixing up a reasonable mid-tone for the fleece of this animal. So I'm going to start with some cad yellow. We'll grab a healthy amount of the tinting white, then just the tiniest touch of the cad red. A little bit more of that. Just the tiniest touch of the ultramarine blue. A little more on the red. Touch of the burnt umber. And on the palette, that's still looking a bit yellowy, but I think it might not be too far off for a starting point anyway for the fleece. So I'm just going to spray the surface of the painting with water, and we'll start to put this colour down. Now last time I put in some greyish shadows, and those will show through. And that's absolutely fine. That's not a problem at all. Okay, so that's a reasonable starting place. But what I want to do next is add a little bit more red front of the animal. So I've probably added way too much there, which is a bit of a habit of mine with red. Cad red seems to be remarkably strong. If I end up grabbing just a little bit too much, then it really does affect the colour. A little bit of burnt umber going in, but that might not be too bad a colour. We'll see what happens. Let's keep the surface of the painting just lightly damp. Oh, that's working okay. So what I'm doing now, I wasn't so worried about it for that first layer of paint, but for this second layer, I am looking at my reference photo and following the way the wool falls across the body of the animal. And I'm using my little flat synthetic brush, and this is the frayed, kind of beaten up one that I've been using for many a year. And I still use it because it gives me nice frayed edges. So that's the thinking there. Okay, so far fairly content. Now I'm going to change the colour next. So we'll grab some ultramarine blue, touch of the cad red, good amount of the tinting white, bit of the burnt umber, perhaps a little bit more, we'll see what this looks like when it goes down. But as we move along the underbelly, I mean, it's kind of working already a little bit because the grey that I put down the other day is showing through, but the shadows change from being kind of reddish in colour to more towards the purple. And that's not too bad. I'm going to darken a little bit of that shadow that I put in the other day. So it's quite important to look within the dark tones and shadows when you're painting to find the range of colours you've got hidden in there. And the same with highlights as well. Very rare that things are just one simple colour. I'm going to grab a bit of the tinting white and mix that in with what I've got left on my brush. And as I come round the left-hand edge of the silhouette, I'll pop some of that there. Now, while I've got that colour on my brush, I'm just cleaning that little brush and switching to, I just chucked that other brush into the water actually. So I'm just switching to this rather neater small flat brush. And I'm going to go back to that dark colour that I had before. Perhaps add a touch of the blue in there and a touch of the burnt umber as well. And that'll make a fairly decent shadow colour, I think, for top of this leg. The top of that one. And the top of that one as well. So just cleaning off that first brush. Surface of the paper, or the painting rather, is still fairly wet. So what I will do next is grab some of the tinting white and we'll lay some of that over the top of what we've got there already. Now the colour of the fleece in that region isn't quite right, but for the moment I'm content to just sort of work a little more tonally. And just need to grab a bit more of the white. Because what I'm about to do is continue with some of that white on top of other areas in the fleece. And because I'm using the tinting white, this is quite a transparent white even once it's dried, so I'm not, or I hope I'm not, obliterating anything that I've done already. And a lot of what I'm putting down now, the underlayers of paint will show through. But just, it's a nice way to introduce some very soft and subtle highlights. Okay, so next then we can keep going with that white. Managed to get a bit of yellow on the brush somehow. I'm going to mix that in with the paler of the purpley shadows that I had already. And we'll fill in the head of the sheep. With that colour. with that same colour, switching back to the neater brush now. Just need to clean that out a bit. So that same colour, let's grab a bit of that. If we put a touch of the blue in there, I think that will work fairly well. For the legs as I move my way down. I think the shadows are a little closer to being a pure blue actually, but that's okay. I think it's going to be all right, and I can always come back and adjust things if I need to. So next what we'll do is grab yet more of our favourite tinting white, a touch of the ultramarine blue, mix those two together, and I will now, I've done this for two reasons. One, I'm about to pop some in here for some slightly lighter shadows. And then two, I'm going to use that to change the colour of that mid-tone that I've put down. And then keeping the same paint on the brush, but I'm just dip the brush into the tinting white. I'm going to come back and use that to add a few brighter areas. That was a bit of a wayward mark, that one, so we'll lift that one off to our sheep head, and I think I may as well keep going with that. Actually, I quite like the coherence of the colour scheme I've got going at the moment. Okay, sticking with that that brush, that neat brush, going to go back to my burnt umber, and I've got this kind of reddish purple mixed in, and there's that slightly paler orangey brown there, so I've mixed those two together, and that I'm hoping will be a reasonable colour for the regions of darker pigment. On the sheep's head. Could probably do with being a bit darker, to be honest, but I kind of look at a painting in two ways. You know, I'm looking at it in terms of how does it compare to the reference, but I'm also looking at it in terms of how's it working as a painting as a whole. So at the moment I'm fairly happy with that for the colour scheme. Now, while I've got that colour on the brush, I'm going to go back in and mix that in with a little more of the purple that I had, and going to move away from these two. You can let me just check. You can see, yes, you can see those three on the right. So those are my shadowy sheep, if you remember from a previous stream. So what I'm going to do is not worry about detail, but use this new version of the colour I've just mixed up to start to introduce a few shadows and things over here. And you notice I sprayed the surface of the painting with water again in this region. So when I'm looking at this sheep and the two lambs that are standing in front of it, I'm just looking at it as a series of big shapes. Where are the big darks? Where are the large lights? So we're not worrying about the highlights or anything too much. And then I'm going to use that same colour to introduce cast shadows underneath these animals. So if you remember from the previous stream, or one of the previous streams, my plan is these two will be the stars of the show. These three are more or less background players, as is this one here. And I think, I like the way that's working at the moment. So I'm going to go over to this one and just trying to find where that animal is in the reference. Here we go. And we'll keep going with that colour and use that as a shadow colour for this one as well. Now, I seem to remember I noticed a mistake I'd made in my initial drawing before in terms of the positioning of the head. So I just need to make sure I go with my corrected smudge as opposed to the original line work. So I'm just looking fairly carefully to try and ensure I get that in the right spot. Don't think that's too bad. Now obviously, there needs to be quite a bit of refinement to this animal, but for the moment, that will be okay. Sticking with that same colour, so deviating from reality quite a lot because the shadows aren't this colour. But in terms of working things up to the next stage, I'm fairly content with how that's gone. I particularly like the way the treatment of this animal has gone. I like the colour scheme here, and then keeping that matching with the colour scheme on this one. I've deliberately not touched those two because they're meant to be off in the distance, so I may well do a little bit later. But for now, I think I'm going to leave that one there, let everything dry, and then I'll be back again with another stream in the near future. So thanks very much.